Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
You're trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong. Good evening, good night, whatever time of the day it is you're listening. Entrepreneurship and Leadership channel listeners on the New Books Network. Today we've got a very special guest, Vasco Pedro, and I'm recording this together with my business partner and friend Kimon Fontekidis. Vasco, how are you doing today?
Hi, Richard. I'm great. Kimon, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Now, Vasco's the CEO of Unbabel, but rather than me trying to introduce him, which I usually mess up my introductions, Vasco, why don't you introduce yourself in a few seconds in the way you do if you meet someone at a business event or a party?
Sure. I'll give it my best shot. It's been a while with the pandemic actually introducing myself in a party, but I'm Vasco. I'm co-founder and CEO of Unbabel. Unbabel, what we do is we are building the world's translation layer, and we're doing that by combining artificial intelligence and human translation. And so the mission of the company is how do we enable every business and eventually every human to communicate in every language? Something you guys are fairly familiar with.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, as you alluded to, I founded a translation company, but what you guys are doing is completely different. But and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that. But maybe you can sort of just go, like, we're super interested here in trying to understand, like, how did you end up founding this company? So, like, maybe just can you start just your story, like when. Well, I guess first of all, you're Portuguese, so but you speak great English. So I'm not sure you grew up in Portugal and then ended up. But just tell us this, like, maybe just the story.
Yeah, sure. So I think language has been in my DNA since I can remember. My mom, now retired, was a professor of English linguistics at the University of Lisbon, and so English was always a part of the house, and language and the idea of language and intelligence and cognition was something that early on really got me interested and curious. And I did my undergrad at the University of Lisbon, and at the time there was this new undergrad degree, which was a major in artificial intelligence with a minor in computational linguistics. And you did the major in the School of Science, the AI part in the School of Science, and the computational linguistics part in the School of Humanities, and it was like two very different atmospheres. But for me, it was always about AI, right? So this understanding that language is probably the most obvious expression of our intelligence, and I see that throughout my entire life of how much our ability to communicate and to be proficient in the language dictates someone else's perception of our intelligence. There's a famous sentence in, I don't know if you guys see Modern Family, but Gloria, right? She's not originally from the US, and she sometimes says, "You don't know how smart I sound in Spanish." And people that use English as a second language a lot of times feel that way, right? Your ability to express things. And so, language is always important to me. And then I did my master's and PhD at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. So I lived in the US for about 10 years. And then that's when I started my first startup, actually. As some PhD students do, I thought I could commercialize the stuff I was researching for my thesis, which, in hindsight wasn't such a bad idea. I was just doing a ton of mistakes as a first-time entrepreneur, and then moved back to Portugal, became a researcher at university while I was continuing to develop different startups, and then eventually in 2013 started Unbabel along with my co-founders.
It's very interesting. So something we've got in common, at least you and I have in common, we come from academic families and went into business. And so if you go back a bit earlier, obviously you did a PhD, you were on a kind of academic track. So was it a surprise for your parents that you didn't mention your father, but for your mum and dad or your mum, that you went into business? Or did they have any kind of expectation that really they're still hoping for the moment you finally succeed when you become a professor?
No, not in my case. I totally get that, right? But I think it was, even my advisors at the university would be, were not surprised that I didn't go into academia. I think in hindsight, from very early on, I could tell that I wasn't the kind of academic PhD. So, and I used to have office mates, and I remember very small things like when you're writing a paper, like I'm the kind of person that writes the paper, and what I like is the work that leads to the paper. It's actually solving the problem and building the thing. I've always been a builder at heart. But then you look at someone that is going to do really well in an academic career, and they really thrive on the message, on going over the sentence and the writing and being really able to communicate clearly and concisely. And the small difference, but you can see where their heart is at and what they're going to focus on. And for me, it was really the building part. I liked the idea of starting with a blank page and having an idea and making it happen. And when I went to the US, the thought I was going to do a master's and then, go back to work. And then that kind of, the 2 years turned into 10 years and kids and this whole life happened, I would say.
And that's very interesting. Maybe I didn't ask the question the right way, but what I was trying to get at was what sort of family pressures or expectations you grew up with, maybe a bit younger. Did you have, because academia and business there is an overlap, but they're quite different worlds, as you've alluded to. So what did your parents want you to be? Because not all academics want their children to go into business.
Yeah, so my parents got divorced when I was 6. And so I had a relationship with my dad, but it wasn't very close. I didn't feel like there was a lot of influence from him in terms of career. My mom was very, very bright. She was, at the time she did her PhD, she was the youngest PhD in Portugal, and she was very involved post-revolution in Portugal. She was very active. But they also grew up, she studied at Sorbonne in Paris. She was there in 1968. So they're part of this generation of kind of, freedom and just be happy. And, coming out of a dictatorship in Portugal where there was much more mandated. And so they were very much on the, hey, you have the opportunity to do whatever you want, right? And so I think the pressure was more on whatever you do it well, right? So my mom was more of the, hey, I expect you, if you're, in Portugal, the grade system for during some of the years is like 0 to 20, right? If I had a 19, my mom would be like, why didn't you get the 20? There was kind of pressure of expectation of, hey, you can do better than that, right? And I think that stayed with me. And both, to be honest, it's good and bad, right? So there's this expectation of excellence also creates a lot of pressure, and sometimes it drives you to achieve that excellence, but sometimes it also creates this constant unsatisfaction, and I see that even today at Unbabel. Like I used to say, we throw amazing parties, and we're really good at doing things other than work, besides the work. But somehow, people always expected that was supposed to be a celebration of an achievement. And what I always felt is actually really bad at celebrating achievements, because as soon as we achieve something, I'm like, okay, 1, we could have done it better, and 2, what's the next thing, And so at some point, we actually had to very actively decouple it in our culture and say, look, we're really bad at celebrating things, but really great at partying. And those two things are not necessarily correlated. We just, we're hard workers that like to have fun. We don't have fun because we achieve something. We have fun because that's an important bit. But we also are constantly unsatisfied by what we've done and how much we could have done. And I think,
why reserve the partying? Yeah. Why reserve the partying for just only when you have those achievements? I mean, when you can have it all the time, right, Vasco? I mean,
that's true. That's the startup life, man.
So let's just, because I'm actually curious. Also, like Richard and I always dig in. So, did you play sports growing up?
Yeah. So, at the age of 10, I went to a military school, a boarding military school in Portugal, for about 5 years, so 10 to 15. And again, good things and bad things about it. But the bad things, the good things were lots of sports, right? So very early on, you had usually 3 or 4 hours of physical activity a day, either specific sports or military related stuff, and so that became part of the DNA. And so I've always been at ease doing different things. I've always felt that I'm not, there's very few things that I passionately love enough that I really want to become an expert, but there's a lot of things that I want to try and experiment with and give it a go, right? And so all sorts of different sports. I think the only sport I've never liked is handball for some reason. But other than that, I used to, at the university, for example, when I was doing my PhD, I remember that there was a couple of semesters that I was doing 7 or 8 intramurals a semester. with volleyball and floor hockey and soccer and tennis and basketball, and just I like to be involved in activities.
And
so that was always
how important was winning to you?
It's important. So when I'm playing something, I am very competitive, right? Like, so when I'm playing something, I'm playing to win, and I will give it all my energy to win. I think it's important to know how to win and how to lose. I think both of them teach you. And so fight till the last second, and, don't do something that is not for winning. But then if you didn't win, then take your defeat, learn from it, and get better.
Yeah, we played that awesome. We played that awesome when I came and visited you in Portugal that time. We played that. What was the name of that game? That is a really good game. What was it called? Paddle?
Oh, paddle. Yeah.
Paddle.
Yeah. Like tennis, but shorter fields. Yeah.
Check it out if anybody's interested in
it started really in South America. So it's very big in Argentina, and migrated to Spain. And then a few years back started making it to Portugal, and it's like growing like wildfire here. It's a good combo because it's kind of social and easy to learn.
Yeah. But it's tech. It's got a little bit of Richard. You'd like it. Richard and I play squash. But there's a little bit of squash in there as well. But you can use the walls and stuff like that. But
it's like a combination of tennis and squash.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'll definitely look into it. And you mentioned children. Are your children old enough to play games with you, either board games or physical sports?
Yes, both. So I have 4 daughters, 17, 15, 12, and 8. And so they have the different ages. They like doing a lot of different activities. There's enough of them we can play a full board game, 6 people, which is great.
And do you let them win ever, or do you always play to win? Never.
I always play to win.
No, the competitiveness was clear. I wanted to jump back onto the other thing, though. What you have that's interesting is that 10 to 15 were quite formative years to be in the military. Now, I don't know what that looked like, but that's kind of like, how did you end up, or I mean, I don't want to ask any personal questions. I'm not sure. Did you do anything did you do anything wrong that you got sent to some military school for 5 years, or and what kind of an impact did that have on you? Because that is unusual.
I think what I did wrong is I was reading the Enlightened the 5. I think that was a really bad mistake. And when my mom suggested, I think my mom at the time was concerned that, my parents being divorced and kind of that, and she wanted to make sure I had structure, and she suggested it. And I thought boarding school, at the time I was reading, the 5, and I thought, oh, all this adventure is going to be great. It's going to be magical. Fortunately, the Harry Potter wasn't around at the time. Otherwise they'd be like, yes, I'm going to be Gryffindor. But as soon as I got there, they too are like, this is a really big mistake. This is not at all like the books. Mom, I don't think I want to be here, but it was too late. She's like, yeah, well, no, you gotta, suck it up for a few years.
Did you ever get into trouble? I mean, being bad in a military school can be a bit different from, being bad is being bad, but the consequences of breaking the rules in a military environment can be quite dramatic compared to regular school. For
a 10-year-old, there's a side of it that feels more like a prison than a school. It really does. It's a tiny prison, right? Even has, and it's much less now. I mean, this was a long time ago, but the Lord of the Fly kind of feeling, there's once adults are only present at class time and few moments, but the ruling class is the older students. And so it's like a little society unto itself. And it's so, and you're confined into a space, right? And you have to do what the older kids tell you. And, it's very physical. I remember that this is nowadays, it would be so impossible. There was this event that would happen once a year, and it was like a battle royale type of thing, right? And you'd get ready for it for weeks, crafting your weapons made out of this, the sheets that you put soap and you let it harden, and you until you got this thing that was so hard it would break a brick, on it, really. And then you'd have first and second years were the prize, so they weren't involved, and then you'd have 7, 8, 9, and 10th grades against 11 and 12th grades in an open field, have at it, lots of people to the hospital, blood, the whole thing, and I'm like, this sounds insane nowadays. But the idea was also that there were, you had strength in numbers, and you could get revenge on older kids, you'd gang up. But it's crazy. It was 3 minutes rounds on just have at it. It was crazy. And curiously, though, I now use a much milder version of that at Unbabel in our offsites, because there was something that I wanted to recreate, which is the catharsis of, a lot of times when you have a game, you have a goal, right? Like you have to score, but in something like that, there is no goal. There is no, it's just, you just explode, right? And there's something cathartic about that. And so what we did was, instead of that, was using colors, right? So watercolors or powder, but have everybody in the company versus the management. 3 minutes, like 3 1-minute rounds, just have at a complete explosion. And it's interesting, the dynamics, right? Because you do have people ganging up and like all of those dynamics, but at the end, people feel a huge release, right? Without any violence. So obviously that makes a difference.
I have to congratulate Vasco. I love first time in my life experiences, and I've never heard of a company where the CEO organizes an environment where the entire company can gang up and physically attack the management, even in a soft way. That's quite remarkable. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it works, people really get enthusiastic about it, right? They get into it, and there's something primal about, and you even do like, you feel it at the beginning, people are doing like chants and being like, getting this motion of like, we're attacking. And it's
do you have any sense of like some of the managers that might be less popular, or any like like, do you get any can you draw any conclusions from the...
Yeah, HR is watching in the background taking notes. Yeah.
And it's not mandatory, obviously, right? If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to participate at all. But the vast majority of people do participate, and they feel like there's a certain also humility of, as a manager, to be like, because obviously if it's like, employees versus managers, it's like a 10-1, right? Or 8-1. So it's like a very big different number. So you have this group of like 30 people versus 150, right? And it's clear you're going to be overwhelmed. There's nothing you can do, right? So it's also an interesting dynamic as a manager to be in this position where you're giving yourself up to that situation. It's
helpless.
An interesting social experiment.
So I want to go back to let's get back into this. So basically, yeah, we got some of but there's clearly some discipline. I mean, I'm sure there's some discipline. There must be some of that military school stuff stayed with you in going into, you said you'd taken some of this into this free for all. Also, there may be some discipline. I'm not sure. In terms of personal self-discipline, I mean,
I think I feel very comfortable in structured environments, but I have a very healthy disrespect for authority. And so it's this duality of, I work well within organized groups and certain military discipline. It's fine, but I also love chaos. And so this ability to, I think it's always been, quite honestly, one of my strengths is the ability to adapt to different environments and to operate within different realities and feel at ease.
So I want to ask about sort of bringing it into the business, because you sort of just touched briefly upon it, but it sounds like you tried or were involved in many. I mean, you mentioned one at when you were in the US, I think, but even it sounds like when you went back to Portugal, can you tell us a bit about your startup, or like your previous, I assume failed business endeavors? Because I think that we learn a lot from that. What did you try to do before, and what did you learn from it?
So there were all different ideas of applying AI to different things. So that's been kind of the recurring topic. I think the first one, the idea was to do targeted advertising for user-generated content. So the goal was, this was at a time where we didn't have a lot of, like, deep learning wasn't around, so you didn't have a lot of image analysis. And you inevitably, in places like YouTube, you'd have ads that were randomly served into videos or images. And the stuff that I did on my thesis was this semantic disambiguation of tags based on ontologies. And so it was federated ontology search. And the idea was, okay, so if you take tags, let's say tags that are around an image, right? And if you see 2 tags like tiger golf, you're talking about Tiger Woods, right? But if you had tiger beetle, you're talking about animals. But if you had golf beetle, you're talking about cars, right? And we humans do this seamlessly, right? We immediately disambiguate. And what I had created was a way to try to replicate this. And so I said, great, but how about if we apply this so that we can do almost real time, a better targeting system for ads on video, which, I think the idea sounds good. And I think it has legs. The challenge with everything else, right? As with a lot of startups, was we raised money, we built a team. I was solo founder at the time. And I did a lot of the mistakes, of pivoting too early, of not sticking with it, of not having a good business model, of a lot of the basic stuff that people run into issues. And then so the second one was Flash Group. There I wasn't founder CEO. I was one of the technical founders. And there, I think it was lack of a CEO. I think that was a big issue. Like the idea there was, so let's say you and I are reading articles on the same soccer game, but in different newspapers. A lot of these small publications don't have enough readership to have a good community and discussion of forums. So the idea was, well, how can we automatically figure out that these articles are actually about the same topic, and then create instantaneous groups that people can talk about that topic, right? There, I think technically was really developed. The team was super strong, but we never, so this was with Carlos Gestrin, which then I think he now leads AI at Apple, and he went to found Datum, was acquired by Apple. But at the time we were a bit all over the place, and we were tail spinning and not clear direction, and ended up, we didn't have healthy respect for sales. So we were like just techies doing tech stuff. And so that ended up not doing so well. And then after that was design. And this idea was, well, can we actually do an evolution of sentiment analysis and do prediction on intangibles? And specifically, the idea was based on the problem of designers, where they're a bit like software developers in the day, where before you had to create some software and put it in a CD, and then actually find shelf space in some vendor to put the CD, and that's when you find out if your software is successful or not, right? And there wasn't that many software houses, and now with the App Store, anybody can develop software, right? But designers are still in that stage where they go in and they design a collection and invest in creating it, and then they have to convince someone to give them shelf space, and then it's all consignment, and then they find out if it was successful or not, and most of them fail. 90% of them fail. And so the idea was, well, can we create the equivalent of an app store for designers, where through recommendations, but then you have to kind of figure out a way to how do you recommend on taste, right? On fashion and taste. And there, I was a technical co-founder. I think part of the issue was it was a shiny object syndrome. Every month there was, no, we're going to do this other thing that's bigger. And we never gave it enough time to really solidify and to build something and put it in the market and really try to find product market fit. Ultimately, I think a lot of these things are about team dynamics, right? It was, instead of a really cohesive and strong founding team, you had personalities that never quite meshed fully and had different ideas and have different goals for the business and different egos. And I think that ends up being a big issue, which was why with Unbabel, I think that was one of my primary concerns.
Well, yeah, you had so much though. I didn't realize this about you. And this is one of the lessons for sure. But I mean, you definitely had a lot of experience before going into Unbabel, basically. I mean, you came into Unbabel with a lot of experience, actually.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Unbabel, so the 4 of the 5 founders of Unbabel, we were working together in design, right? So, and João and I had been working together in Flash Group and design. So these were people that I had been in the trenches with, and I knew that we meshed from a team dynamics, both in complementarity of skills, but also on the ability to withstand hardship and to rely on each other, right? From an emotional I'm missing the word right now, but we meshed really well, right? And so, for example, the whole surfing thing with Unbabel. So when Unbabel, surfing is a big part of our DNA, and fortunately things are reopening now. So starting Thursday, we go back to surfing, meaning every Thursday, 7 a.m., there's a bus. Well, right now we still can't do the bus because of COVID, but you can go to the beach and there's instructors and boards and you have a lesson. And this has been because we were surfing before Unbabel, the 4 of us together. And it was we suck at surfing. We still do. We're really not good. But it was really about this idea of how do we find activities that help us pay off this emotional debt between founders? And as you accumulate pressures during the week and the stuff you're doing, how do you create these moments outside of work that enable you to reconnect, right? To do something that enables you to have those conversations about small things, so that when big things come, you're not actually hashing out everything else, but you actually focus on the actual issue you're trying to solve. And that made a difference. And so we kind of kept doing it.
Yeah, and I wanted to jump onto the word hardship. You mentioned hardships, and one of the things we want to do is make this podcast real, not sort of idealize the idea that it's this, because there's a sort of media image of the entrepreneur and it's just wonderful and someone raises money and goes public or sells for $1 billion a very short time afterwards. And the reality is it is quite a tough, can be extremely tough. What sort of things for you personally, given your character, were the things you found hardest, not necessarily in Unbabel, but it could include Unbabel? You know, if you sort of things are the things that are worst as an entrepreneur, what gives you the most stress, the most hardship for you as Vasco?
That's a really good point. I think in Babel, for example, when we are, the IPO super successful, it's going to be one of those overnight successes, 8 years in the making or 10 years in the making, right? And right, and people are going to be like, oh, they knew it all along, right? And it's really not true, right? I mean, to give you a sense, when we started in Babel, the actual moment that we said, let's do this. So we were doing design and we ran out of money, and the CEO at the time told us that we ran out of money at the end of the month, kind of like, hey guys, by the way, this month we ran out of money 30 days ago. I just didn't tell you. And so, sorry, right? And
thanks for working for another 30 days.
Right. And which wasn't great, right? And it reflects the lack of trust that needed to exist between co-founders for that not to happen, right? And I knew at the time that, we had been thinking about ideas, right? And I knew at the time that if we didn't do something together, everybody was going to find a job, and like a month from now or 2 months from now, like we had missed the timing, right? And so we decided, let's do this now, right? Let's sit together and let's do this now. And we actually went out surfing for a weekend, and everybody got their little notebook and wrote ideas, and that was officially when Unbabel was born. But my fourth daughter was 4 months. My wife at the time was focused on the kids and not working. My co-founder, João, like his wife was pregnant. In my case, I started putting, like, we didn't have money, right? And he said, look, let's first, there was some things we wanted to do and prove out the concept, and we were going to start fundraising in a couple of months. And between one thing and the other, the first 6 months, nobody got paid. You see your bank account dwindling. You're getting to the point where you're thinking like, I'm not going to be able to pay rent next month, right? With 4 kids. And so you need to be able to risk that, right? And a lot of times people say, well, how could you do it? And I always feel divided, because there is such a thing as a reality distortion field, right? Something inside you that's like, you know what, it's going to be okay somehow, right? And a lot of times it isn't, right? And so if you get too stressed about those things, it's going to be hard, but they're real, they're there, right? And they're in front of you. Or things like, we got into Y Combinator, which is great, but the hardship was you needed to go there for 3 months, and leave the kids. And my co-founder, for example, his kid was like 2 months old, and you got to go, right? You got to be able to prioritize certain things at a certain time. The first 3 years of Unbabel, it's mostly, traveling a lot in the cheapest, dungiest hotels and planes you can find, saving, scraping every dime, trying to, always making the buck stretch. Like after YC, for example, I remember Series A. So our Series A was very interesting. We started out, we thought we were doing great, and in hindsight, we weren't doing that great. So we had, I think at the time, maybe $1 million ARR, but we had like 30% margin, which for, SaaS startup, like that's not where you want to be. And I sent this email to YC and say, hey, we're, Sam Altman was like, hey, we're thinking of doing RA. And he tells YC investors, and literally 3 minutes later, Mark Andreessen writes an email, I want to see this guy's here. And we're thinking like, holy shit, this is awesome. And we thought we have time to prepare. We don't. It's 3 days later. We're, in front of Mark Andreessen. We're like super excited. And we thought, this is great. Like, we're going to close our A. It's going to be like easy, right? And then it didn't. And then the next 50 meetings also didn't. And at that time, the money's starting to running out. You're thinking, holy shit, what are we going to do, right? And halfway through it, I look at our customers, and I realized that if we took customer service only, we would be making more money than everything else. So I fire 70% of our customers. So it goes from $1 million ARR to 200K ARR, but with much better margins. And we, in the last meeting of that we had booked for the Series A, which was Notion, say, hey guys, like, you probably don't want to talk to us because we literally just fired 70% of our customers. And somehow, like all of this is like this huge roller coaster, which happens to be fairly typical in a startup life, right? So it's not like this is unique. I think it's that amplitude of emotions that makes it hard. I think that's one thing. And the other is, like in terms of what keeps me awake, I think those things are hardships and they suck. And, as things get better, your quality of life gets better. And certainly there's an impact there. But the thing that stresses me more, it's still, if there's fundamental aspects in the team dynamics that I feel that they're not right, I've seen that so many times play out as cancers that grow, that those are things that I'm like, I can't rest until I feel that that's been fixed.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who's not at Vasco's stage in their entrepreneurial journey, that balance between what you call the reality distortion field, just like, blind optimism or faith, and the reality that, there's real stress there. I'd always imagined that as a YC company, you had like and this is my mistake, my ignorance, that somehow you were, had the sort of the golden boy, cushy, easy time right from the word go, and you obviously didn't. So you've been through really tough times. I know you're much better funded now, obviously, but back then you were really struggling. But I wanted to jump back a moment to where your entrepreneurship comes from. You said you like building things, but when you were a teenager, did you know what you wanted to be? Did you know you wanted to be a business person? Was that when was the first moment you actually made a profit selling something? Did you have jobs as a teenager, or were you did you have plenty of money as well? Were you well off as a family? Are professors in Portugal quite well paid, so you grew up with money, or was it more like you were quite hungry to have a bit of the material stuff? We weren't well off. I think my mom, as a university professor, I would say middle class, like middle, not even really upper middle class, but like somewhere between middle and upper middle, like meaning I never went hungry. I had access to good experience. Like I traveled, like when my mom would go to some places, I would go with her. I remember not feeling like I had like I was lacking in things, but also, like there wasn't luxury of any kind, right? It was normal things. Money wasn't so much a goal or a lack of goal. Like it was never presented to me as, hey, you need to have a lot of money, or like money is bad or good. It was just something that served to do your life. I think, and in fact, when I think about money, even though it is better to have money than to not have much, sure, that wasn't really the motivation for me when I think about it. I think I've always wanted to have enough money that I didn't have to worry about it. But for example, I tried to do this exercise a while ago of, if I had to spend $1 billion, where would I actually spend it, right? And on a personal level, it's incredibly hard for me to think about how I would spend it. But if I think about Unbabel and the things I want to build, it's incredibly easy for me to think, oh, if I had $1 billion, here's what I would do. I'd build all of this. What I do remember is, so the first job I had that I got money was actually at 14. Summer, I worked in a meat factory, not actually with the meat. I was like a courier delivering mail inside the factory. But I literally got to see how the sausage was made, that was interesting. And then after that, I think, during my high school, I worked in, I used to manage a little cafe of a hotel here in Lisbon, the employee cafe of the Meridian Hotel in Lisbon on the weekends, which is great because, at lunch you could eat with the employees, which got all the desserts that were coming back from the hotel restaurant, which is awesome. And then summers I would always try to work. And then in college was the first time that I sold software for some money. So I remember someone saying, hey, I need this built, and I did it in Pascal at the time. It was a little software to manage an accounting of some sort. What I really loved, so I was very, very, very focused on coding, right, on building things like that. I remember, like, I started coding when I was 6. I remember, so I had my first computer was a Spectrum 48K, and in the newspaper, they would publish on the weekends games, like the lines of codes of games, right, for Spectrum. And I would spend the weekend coding that and then recording to tapes. And then you have like the debugging was play the tape back and see if the game actually shows up. And if it didn't, go through the 2,000 lines and try to figure out what you did wrong. Sometimes there's typos in the newspaper,
But so I remember doing that from early on and always being very excited about programming, about computers in general. And so I knew very early on that I wanted to do something with computers. I knew that I liked like building things like Lego, or I would spend hours and hours. So there used to be this stubs, the ticket stubs for the bus in Lisbon. I would collect those, and then I would make constructions out of them. Like just actual building things with my hands always gave me a lot of pleasure. So I knew that, and if I look back, I think the first time I ever thought I was going to have a company, I remember a conversation at 15 where of thinking that and saying that, yeah, like I knew that I wanted to do some postgraduate degree in the US, some master's, and I knew that at some point I wanted to have a company of some sort. But it was mostly the driver of building things, right? It was a combination of building things and this idea that I wouldn't be accountable to anyone, that I wouldn't be subjected to anyone's authority, right? That I could do what I wanted, which obviously is very naive. That is never the case. But that thought and that seed was in my mind. And then the real first time that I seriously thought about doing a startup was actually when I was interning at Google. And I remember the feeling of, Google, this was 2007, and it was a bit la la land for developers. It was like, here's infinite resources in a playground of huge size, and go have fun and do interesting things, right? And I remember spending those 4 months there, and at the end feeling like, wow, like this is amazing, but the probability of me having impact in this organization is very little. I'm going to be this little cog in this giant machine, and I want to do something where I have more impact. And that was the first time that I thought, oh wow, like I need to go and do something for myself.
Vasco, Richard is big into the startup community here in Krakow. He's invested in tons of startups. I'm just a traditional. This about me. I'm a traditional sort of business guy. So I actually don't know the way it all works. So and I'm not sure if you're allowed, or if you're not allowed to tell us, then don't tell us. But like, could you walk us through how funding? Like, so you talked about A. Was there a round before? Were there any rounds before A? And how much, and how did it, can you just walk us through how you did it with Unbabel from the funding perspective? Because for me, this is what's interesting. This is what's very different about doing things with VC and getting investors and stuff like that, is there's this whole managing your investors part of the business that I don't have no experience with. So I'm really interested in this. So if you could just talk us through that, if you can, whatever you can, even all the way till today. I think that's really interesting, actually.
Sure. So we started Unbabel in August of 2013. When we started, we said, look, we have 1 month to build a prototype and to show that this concept works. And so we worked like crazy. And we have this little prototype that shows that you can send text and get a machine translation and people editing, and text comes out on the other side, right? And a friend of ours here in the university says, hey, you should just talk to a couple of investors, just to get some feedback. And we go into what was supposed to be just a little cafe, having a little coffee, and it turns into a big meeting room with 3 associates and people expecting presentation and what's the business plan and where's the, how the monetization. And we're like, I don't know, I haven't thought about that. So lesson 1 is there is no such thing as just coffee with investors, never, right?
Always be prepared.
Yes, I got out of there, this is never going to happen again, ever. This is, of course they're like, we don't even know how we're going to make money. This is ridiculous. We're not going to invest. And so we get out of there. I'm like, it's not going to happen again. I read this book called Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff. Changed really my mindset on pitching. I think in general, the mindset that he presented was very compelling, and I can go into that later. But then what happens September 19, we have first meetings with investors, and we start getting interest, right? And as that happens, on October we apply to Y Combinator. In November, we literally, the day that I'm about to sign the term sheets, at the time I thought, wow, it's going to be great. We never have to fundraise again. This was 200K of fundraising at the time. And that morning, I get an email from YC saying, actually, we'd love to see you guys here in the interview. And I'm like, okay, guys, to the investors here in Lisbon, look, we can't sign anything. We need to play this out. And we made a deal with them. We said, look, if you guys stick with us, if we don't make it, because still 30% chance getting in, then we also stick with you even if we get in. So if we get in, you can still invest. If you don't get in, you still invest. And so that was the verbal agreement. So we go to YC, we make it in, we end up raising kind of the YC initial round, and in our case, ended up a little bigger because the Lisbon investors invested at the time, Faber and Schilling, which has always been amazing partners. And so we go through YC, and at the end of YC, typically there's the demo day round. And Richard, that is very much what you were thinking, like the cushy, like YC does this amazing job at demo day of turning the tables, where suddenly there's this frenzy of investors wanting to invest. And we raised $1.5 million in a week. And it was crazy, like 1 hour calls and boom, that was it, right? And YC used to say, this is going to be the easiest money you're ever going to raise. And they were very right. You just, at the time, you think, no. First of all, this is the last money you're ever going to need to raise. And second of all, if we ever need to raise, it's going to be even easier, right? And it really is.
Sorry, but is that what you would call? And remember, I'm the guy that doesn't know anything. That's
pre-seed.
That's
pre-seed. So demo day. So demo day is kind of seed.
Okay.
When we got into YC, I would say that's like a pre-seed round, and then a year later, we we're running out of money. We're like, okay, I think it's time. We weren't ready for the A, and we had too many people. And we started raising a seed extension, and the numbers aren't there. And at some point, we go through this whole circus, and we have this meeting, and we said, look, we had, I think at the time, maybe 20 people, and we're like, okay, we need to let go 50% of our. No, actually, I had 14 people, and we either had to hire 6 more to get some product done, or we needed to let go of half the people to conserve cash, and we decided to do that, right? And so we let go of 7 people, which were all good friends, and it was hard. And then literally the next day, I have a call from an investor that had talked to Andreessen Horowitz, and they said, like, we should invest. And they basically, in the next day, we closed the round. It was like it was that.
So what was that now? That was like after.
That was another $1 million. So there was another $1 million.
And that's what's called like seed 2.
That was a seed extension. Yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, we did RA. So 2016.
And sorry, Vasco, I don't know, again, if this is stuff you can share, but I'm just fascinated by it. So you can just tell me, no, I can't tell you. What were the valuations? Like, how did the valuations work? Is valuation secret information? Also tell me so I don't ask anything.
A little bit.
Okay. So I won't. Sorry. So we won't talk about that. So it's $1 million. Okay, so you got another $1 million. So you got at this point.
But think about it in general. At that time, probably. Having a 10x to 20x on revenue would be normal. And I can tell you that the valuation we got on our after YC wasn't a real valuation because we raised using a safe. So it's a cap on a potential valuation of a Series A, but it was 8 million out of YC. And so YC was great for a lot of reasons, but also it literally just getting to YC tripled our valuation, like overnight.
Oh, okay.
Right. And it was because you're a hotter commodity, right? You have access to better investors, potential customers, all of that stuff. So then the YC network does, and having done a startup in the US, in Pittsburgh, and going to Silicon Valley to try and raise money, that is a huge difference. So it does really feel when you go through YC, it's like going in through the front door. And, it's like, okay, you went to Harvard, it's like, oh, people will take the meeting and will talk to you, will listen, and versus not where you are seen a bit as an outsider. And it used to be much harder. I think now with the pandemic, also things have been changing a lot, but in 2007 and 2013, that was definitely the case.
Okay, so that was seed extension. Yeah. We got to seed extension, and this is before the A that you were talking about.
And then we did our A, right, which was we raised 5, and then we did our B, which we raised 20, and then we did our C, where we raised 60. Actually, I think the B was a bit more. The B was like 23 total. So far, we raised 91. So overall.
And just for people who aren't familiar with this territory, when Vasco says he raised 60, that probably means that you might have an enterprise value of 200 million, 300 million, 400.
Yeah, in that range.
Because that 60 doesn't get the whole company, that gets a share of the company, and no sensible investor wants to dilute the founding team too much, that if you occasionally come across people who got this wrong and you end up with the founder leader who owns just a couple of percentage points of the company because they raise at too low a valuation, too much money at too low a valuation too early, because the rule of thumb is raise as little as possible, as late as possible, I think, or I don't know,
Yes.
maybe you can comment on that.
No, but that's definitely learning that I think. So I think we weren't capital efficient at Unbabel, and there's a lot of debate, I think, internally and externally on, well, can AI companies at this point be really capital efficient, because they end up resembling less like SaaS companies and more like deep tech. So there's a lot of investment upfront to do a lot of the building and researching, et cetera. But in our case, I think it took us a while to figure out the product market fit in our first use case. And I think if that had happened earlier, like for example, the money we took when we got into IC, we didn't need it. Like in hindsight, we didn't need it. It was us thinking, edging our bets, but like it diluted us unnecessarily. I think we should have made the seed round last longer. Like I think we were too eager and to scale things and to invest more before we actually started figuring out more of the product market fit part. And I think, and then that has consequences, right? Because if you're not in a great shape to raise your A, then your A is going to be more dilutive than it needs to be. So there's kind of fortunately, I think in our case, every investor that we've had in leading rounds in general has been really great. And so there's no funky terms in our term sheets and weird things that, have future impact on future rounds. It's very clean and it's very straightforward. But I do think that if I would have gone back and redo it, knowing what I know now, I would have raised less money than I have raised so far to achieve
I have a question, which you might not be able to answer, or you're not gonna be able to answer honestly. But like, how valuable are these? Like, so okay, these investors are giving you money, and obviously the money is the rocket fuel for your business, so that's obviously extremely important. But are you getting also pitched that you're going to get extra? Like, I have this experience, I have this network, I have this, and like, how valuable is that? Like, maybe you can speak a little bit to that. Is that part of their pitch for you accepting them as investors? And then in your experience, are the investors providing value? And I said, you're probably not going to, because they might listen. Can you, I don't know that you can actually answer the question, honestly.
I think especially there's a lot of capital, right now. And when I say this, I used to hear this and I was like, oh, wow, there's money floating around for free. No, like, there's just a lot of people investing, right? And there's a lot of funds. And so it's a bit of fundraising is always feast or famine, right? It's always either you're not getting, or suddenly when you get everyone's interest. And once that happens, a lot of VCs try to differentiate themselves. And they, the vast majority is always, they always overestimate the value that they're going to bring to the equation beyond the money, like always, right? With very, very few exceptions. It's always like, well, we have this great platform that we're going to help in A, B, C, and D. And some of them, quite honestly, if you ask them for help, they will, right? The question is, a lot of times you don't need that much of the help. I mean, at this stage, a lot of times, where do you really need help with investors? Potentially in hiring, like if they know really good people at leadership roles, and they can introduce you, like introduction to customers. I think that
sales.
That's always,
I would have expected sales. I would have expected,
right?
That's.
But I think with investors in sales. So, for example, I remember the feeling of Andreessen Horowitz, that was really amazing. It was the only ones that, when they invested, especially at a later stage, they basically almost requested that someone like the CRO or whoever's leading sales would sit in their office, because every day they were bringing CEOs of Fortune 500 and Fortune 2000 companies to their office and have their investors pitch them, right? Like that's a real, real benefit, right? Of like, right. We actually make this happen. Most investors, it's more like if you scour their LinkedIn's and you say, hey, can you introduce me to this person? They will definitely do it, right? If an investor can help, they will want to help. But very few investors actually have people doing very proactive work on trying to find new customers, And I think if you, Scale Venture Partners, they led our B, right? They're probably Andy. I love Andy. So the people on our board, one is Chris Topman from Notion, who was a founder of Message Labs, and so he has a lot of the founder background. He's done, like he has that founder mentality. And then Andy Vitas from Scale led RB. He's also on our board. And then Sri from Point72 led RC, right? And they're very different, but they're really good in a lot of different ways. So Andy's probably the most pragmatic in the sense of one of the things said about Scale is, hey, we don't have a platform. We don't, like what we help is we help with money, and then we just help with pattern matching, right? We've seen a lot of things, and we can give you some guidance, but you need to build a company, right? Like it's very like, I'm not going to build a company for you. You need to build a company, right? And there's no there's no bullshit in that sense, and I think that's really important. For us, that really works, right? And so most investors always think they're going to provide more value. They usually don't. It's not that they don't want to. It's just it's hard, right? Because you're going 1,000 miles an hour, and just contextualizing an investor on unless it's very self-contained and you say, look, I have this problem or this issue or this challenge, here it is, I'd love your guidance. Sometimes that really works because they have a certain expertise. For example, in the case of eVentures and Greycroft. So one of the partners at Greycroft used to be the CMO at LinkedIn. She's really amazing. And when I was thinking about marketing and go-to-market, one of the big conversations I had with her was like, hey, one of the key people was RevOps, and why that was important, and why having this RevOps person at this stage was super important, and the impact it had, et cetera. And that made a difference. I went and hired a RevOps person, and it is having an impact, right? So things like that, where you have access to people that have done certain things that can really say, hey, look, this really worked for me. I think that makes a difference. But a lot of times, if you end up with a guy just came out of Harvard, did his MBA, now it's going to spend the next 6 months giving you advice on how to restructure your business model. That's not going to be
a whole lot of value. Listen, we're approaching an hour here, and we've gotten to the point where you have a company that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Clearly, we don't know exactly how much, but let's say hundreds of millions of dollars. But we don't know the viewers, the people that are listening, they probably have no idea what you actually do. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what is Unbabel? What does Unbabel actually do? What problem does it solve? Maybe just a bit about that. I think that now is high time if we don't get to it.
And make it quite telegraphic in the sense that someone who doesn't know the industry should be able to understand you.
Okay, so the fundamental problem comes from this, right? Which is people speak different languages, right? This is very obvious, but actually, this is it sounds very obvious. It's like people speak different languages, and they always will, right? There was not going to be a time where we all speak the same language. And the problem fundamentally is as a business grows and goes beyond their initial market and expands, they start having to deal with people that speak different languages, right? And that happens across the entire company. How do I sell my product? How do I advertise it? How do I serve my customers? How do I, get them to use the product? And so this happens as they scale across every function, right? And it's this issue of dealing with languages that ultimately we're trying to solve. Now, the big thing that changed over the last 10 years is that artificial intelligence started having an impact, right? So, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, right around when we started, it was that time where when you took the output of a machine translation engine like Google Translate and you gave it to a human to fix it, the first thing they would do was not erase everything and start from scratch. Actually, it started being somewhat helpful, right? And that change of how AI is going to affect the way we do translation and we do localization and we do all of the language services creates a lot of opportunities. And it creates the opportunity for localization to evolve into doing more than they were doing until now. So if you think about the whole market of localization and translation, is primarily focused on two of these problems, marketing and product, right? How do I translate my website and my documents and my product? But companies have the same problem on how do I support my customers, right? So if we take that as an example, so that's right now our core use case. Until we came here, until we started, the way to support customers in multiple languages is hire people that speak that language, right? So I have a team of people that speak German and a team that speak people that speak French and Spanish and so on. Now with Unbabel, because of this combination of AI and humans, you can do faster translations with good quality in a scalable way. Suddenly you can hire people that just speak English. And in our case, we focus on text, so email and chat. And that customer service agent that only speaks English can communicate with anybody in any language. And this really has a couple of very interesting impacts on how you can do customer service in multiple languages. One is it reduces the cost. So if you take a German native speaker in Germany, it costs you, let's say, 3K a month. And if you have someone in the Philippines, even if you put Unbabel on top, it costs you half that cost, right? So there's a efficiency in cost. But actually, more importantly, you have an increase in CSAT, so in customer satisfaction. So it's a better way of doing customer service because you have a faster time to first response. You're maximizing the use of the workforce, and you can hire people that are really experts in the product rather than just experts in the language. And so this is creating a different way for companies to do multilingual customer support. So what do? So our vision is we want to create what we think about as language operations, right? A category of language operations, which is how do we enable businesses to scale across markets and deal with language issues, but in a very scalable, structured way. And so we're building a platform to enable language operations at scale. We started with customer service, and then we'll expand to other areas.
So
Not
basically,
bad.
right? Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Richard, actually, I'm more into it. Maybe you should ask a question.
No, I'm saying not bad. So basically someone could buy I don't know, a modem made by Cisco or whoever makes modems, and they're in Vietnam and they send in a chat request in Vietnamese, and a customer service agent who doesn't speak Vietnamese is able to look after them because the type of questions that person has can be quite easily modeled by machine learning and AI. That they're not going to ask what the weather's like in Manila, but they might ask, what does that flashing green light mean? Is that correct? That it's you can look after your customers without speaking their language?
Yeah, that is correct. But even if they ask the weather, that would be fine because of this blended model of AI and humans, right? So we can deal with things beyond just the template because of that. One actual example, like Logitech is one of our customers. It's very interesting because what happened during the pandemic, everybody was buying cameras. So they had to deal with a 300% increase in customer service requests. And now especially for the tier of interactions that Logitech wanted to use, is they need to hire engineers to, that's typically what they do. They hire engineers for their customer service teams for like tier 2 customer service. And hiring a bunch of engineers in a bunch of different languages and training them remotely, it would have been impossible. And so using Unbabel, they scaled to 300% increase in customer service requests. They reduced 48 hours to 12 hours turnaround time without having to hire people that spoke different languages.
And very importantly, and this is something that a lot of people don't get with automation, really you're increasing the productivity of human beings enormously. This isn't replacing people with machines, it's making people way more efficient. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. And it happens on both sides, right? So the humans that translate can translate not only more words, but also focus on the things that are better instead of dealing with the crappy part of translation, which there's quite a lot of it. But those are things that machines are actually quite good at dealing with. But then the agents also can handle more people and can handle people in more languages, right? Which means that ultimately customers have a better service. So for example, if I want to talk to British Airways and I'm in London, I can do that 24/7. But if I'm in Lisbon, it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, right? They don't have 24/7 support. Like having that ability to provide equal customer support independently of language is, it's a bit crossing that language gap, right? I mean, we live in a world where if you happen to be born in a country where you don't speak languages that are widely used, you effectively have less access to information, to services, to resolve things, to interact with other parts of the world. And, this enables you to overcome that.
And how does your platform differ, from, let's say, a traditional translation agency when you have, because you have translators, who's actually doing the linguistic work on the back end? I know, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about community. Because I'm in the translation industry, I know you have a different model, and I think it is actually interesting to talk about what's your model when it comes to the people that are actually doing the work.
So the fundamental pipeline of translation on Unbabel works roughly like this. So you have text coming in, and then you have a machine translation engine that does the first translation. Now, this machine this engine is customized on a per customer basis, right? So it's constantly learning and improving on the vocabulary and tone of a particular customer, formal, informal, language pair, etc. And then the translation that comes out of there then is evaluated by something called quality estimation. So that is a module that does a real-time evaluation and decision on whether do we think that that's good enough or does it need a human, right? And so as the AI gets better, the easier stuff doesn't need humans anymore, and so the hard things still get sent to a human. And then when it goes to a human, we have a community of translators. When we started out, and that's something that's been evolving over time. So when we started out, the vision was, well, if we're going to translate this much content, there just isn't enough professional translators to do it. I mean, there's like 500,000 professional translators in the world, roughly, right? So if you're going to have millions of people involved, you need to have bilinguals involved. And so the idea is, can we also leverage AI to help a non-specialist translator to perform at the level of a professional translator, right? With AI-powered CAT tools, for example. So the CAT tool that the translators use has embedded a lot of things that try to make it easier for a non-professional to still produce high-quality work. What we've seen, though, over time as we focus on and experiment with different types of content is that the bilingual community is really great for certain types of content. So, for example, what we do with emails and chat, this blend of speed and quality and cost, and it's just, you can't do it with traditional translation, and you can't do it with just machine translation. So there's a sweet spot here in emails, for example. They really need this, like this is a massive advantage. But as you expand that, the way of thinking to other content types, the community also needs to evolve, right? And so I think what we're going to see in the Unbabel community is not just doing, okay, here's an email to translate, but it's people that maybe are experts in I don't know, medical or legal or specific marketing things, or that actually what they do is supporting roles like annotations of that enable you to generate NQM in a scalable way to any document, or sentiment analysis, or anonymization, or other services that are NLP related that enable you to then scale those operations. And so right now they're decoupled. So the community is kind of seen as the human component, right? And so gets input of text and a certain task to do and does the task. But there's a lot of work on vetting and managing and curating and evaluating and this constant process. Still, okay, I mean, I still feel very much that we're just the beginning, right? There's a lot.
Yeah, I know. That's what's exciting. I mean, particularly for the people that are listening to this from the industry and, may not know that much about you guys or learning about you guys. So, because here you are, I mean, you're basically a very tech savvy AI machine learning company in the translation space that's very well funded. And so where are you going to take this? That's what's the really interesting. So you've started, basically you've proven it out. You've gotten investors to buy into the fact that you're doing what we in the translation industry would consider relatively the easier sort of types of contents, which would be, let's say, chat and email. But clearly you're set up to be able to take this into, let's say, the more traditional spaces. So can you talk about the future? Like where are you taking Unbabel? Like where are you going to take it?
So what we found, Kimon, is that the challenge sometimes are different. So I think for the traditional translation, to translate an email is easier, right? But to do it at the speed and scale and cost that we do it, with the quality that we do it, that's really the hard part, right?
I should have been clear. The linguistic problem, only the linguistic challenge is, but for what you do, it's highly challenging to be able to turn over all that very fast.
We do now a couple of billion words a year, right?
Exactly.
On email and chat, right? And so it's and our average turnaround time is what, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? And so it's that combination that creates that scalability. I think of Unbabel there's an Unbabel master plan, right? That I've actually very recently put it to paper. It was always in my mind, but now it's in paper. And I see it myself as, if you think of this as the metaphor, a lot of times we use it in startup world, right? The metaphor of conquering a territory, right? I think the phase that we were before, so in this plan, we're in phase 3 now. Phase 2 was conquering the beachhead, right? Phase 1 was really, hey, build the core stuff, just show that it works. Get the pieces ready. And then phase 2 was, okay, we've experimented with a bunch of stuff, the seed stage. Now we think customer service is the goal. Let's go and build, capture the beachhead, right? And that beachhead was customer service. In the phase that we're now is, okay, if you capture the beachhead, you now need to build a moat, and you need to build a fort that you can then raid other stuff from, right? And so this is the phase that we're in. It was like, okay, grow that mode of customer service. Really, like, no one's going to listen to you until you're big enough that, and the way to do that is to really own a space. If you scatter and if you diffuse yourself too much, then it becomes really hard to have a voice, a real voice. And so that for us was customer service, and continues to be. But then what's happening now is with language operations, it's really building this fort that we can start doing more, that we can start exploring and seeing, how do we raid other parts of the territory. But I think that's the key part, right? Is in my mind is, okay, if we were to rethink, and it goes back to your question of why is this different? Like, this is a question a lot in my mind. Why is this different than a TMS, right? Like there's 100 TMSs out there. Why is this different? And I think the big difference is, if you were to reimagine a TMS from an AI first perspective, how would that look like, right? Like, and I think that's really where we can make a difference from really influencing the lives of what used to be localization managers, and I think you're going to evolve into lang ops. It's, for example, so a localization manager typically has expertise in linguistics, project management, a lot of times customer-facing role in managing customers. Typically, what you don't see is experience in AI, right? But that's the thing that's going to have a lot of impact. So what if you were to rethink AI first, for example? So in the Unbabel portal, the idea is that you, as a non-expert in AI, should be able to take everything from zero to deploying models to understanding the impact that AI is having in your customer, and blend it in with the human process that you have, and be able to manage all of that in a scalable way, right? And so I think the real difference is the AI first perspective, but then that has a lot of snowball effect into everything. Like, take glossaries, right? Right now, the way we create glossaries, there's a couple of tools, but they're all very primitive and usually requires a lot of manual curation. But there should be an AI that constantly is trying to curate that and help you and suggest and make your life easier, right? And make all of that, like, grunt work better and easier. The same thing with translation memories, the same thing with anonymization, the same thing with, a lot of like the tasks that localization people tend to do. And when you do that, then you can scale it, right? And you can, right now, it's the localization industry works in a task-oriented thing, project-based, and very like, you do this and this person does that. But what happens if you think from an account perspective, right? How can you have a maestro that really owns and improves the translation layer of the company, where you have a central AI that is constantly learning and improving, and enabling then an additional set of human work to happen so that you can scale across the company. We want to take, yeah, sorry, go ahead. I get too excited about this.
I know, it is exciting. I just want to do a quick jargon bust that NLP is not neuro-linguistic processing, but natural language processing. And TMS means translation management system. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
And in terms of the numbers, for people who don't know the industry, if we take 5 euro cents or American cents per word as a bargain basement price for human translation, 2 billion words would be like $100 million worth of translation. And am I right in thinking that you're driving so much cost out of this that effectively you're opening up the possibility of quality translation in areas where previously people just wouldn't have even considered it remotely affordable? That you're taking, people who are in the translation industry might panic and think, oh my God, Unbabel's going to knock out the rest of the industry because we can't compete with this. On the other hand, the market's going to explode, presumably, or the use cases are going to explode.
Yes, I think that the percentage of content that is translated nowadays is a small percentage of what should be translated, and it's really the content that is the most painful. I used to use a metaphor for Unbabel, which was what happened, in humanity with water. So it used to be, and it's still the case in some place in the world, where get water, you get a bucket, go to the well, bring back water, right? It's like every time you wanted it, you go to the bucket and spend hours a day doing this. And then you had, infrastructure built, right? You had pipes and you had, water that was available in the faucet. And when you had a faucet, it fundamentally changed people's lives, health, the amount of free time, your ability to do other tasks. And translation is a bit that's bucket stage, like I need to have this translated, I go and, do a procurement and set up a project and allocate it to someone. And, I go to the bucket and I send it to the well, and this creates a lot of friction. But what if there were faucets everywhere, right? What if translation was just a layer in between that would just enable things to happen and communication to happen seamlessly?
Yeah, I would actually say one thing again for it's because I know you, but you started the business, and you, from what I recall in previous conversations, you never had anybody from a translation company working in your business, and I think that's one of the key secrets to building something. No, I'm completely serious now. You're talking about AI enabled and all that stuff, but the truth is you've also built it from a different perspective, actually. And I think that's massively important. And that's because you hit the nail on the head on so many ways. And we are a very task oriented industry, and we are fetching buckets back and forth. And that's not optimal. So I do think that, I think that the way you built the platform actually is really important here.
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, right? So for example, I think that sometimes it enabled us to think things differently, but sometimes we reinvented the wheel, So, for example, given that at the beginning, we didn't know if we're going to go big enterprise, and which is more and more what's happening in customer service, like the impact that our customers tend to, our ICP, so ideal customer profile, tends to be B2C large companies that, have large customer service organizations. If I knew that was the case from the beginning, I probably would have actually spent maybe 3 months just sitting with a translation agency and see how they work. That would have saved me so much time.
I own a translation agency, and we can't compete with you on customer service. I mean, we couldn't possibly do it. I mean, it's just something we can't do that. We're not set up for that. We're set up for something else. What's interesting in your case, though, and we're clearly not able to transition into that. What's interesting in your case is you've built the machine and the platform that I believe, in talks with you as well, that you are going to be able to transition this into sort of like other spaces as well. I think that's exciting, personally.
Yeah, I think I believe so too. But I sometimes I think that people expect that to happen overnight. I think language is tricky, right? I mean,
Yes.
if you think about it, language and translation was the original AI use case, right? I mean, 1960, out of the Second World War and the whole cipher and effort with Second World War, the idea was with Alan Turing was actually we could look at languages as codes, right? Like someone took our language and applied a code and became French, right? And so we could use the same thing. And so that was a bit the birth of AI, and thinking like 5 to 10 years, we'll have machine translation fixed, and it's gonna be solved. And this was 1960, right? And we're really far from it, right? So it's a mistake we do often, I think, as humans, is because language is so core to us and it's so seamless and easy, we assume that it should be easy. And there's actually, it is very much a very nuanced expression of intelligence, right? And so I think it's amazing the amount of stuff that we can do now with deep learning, and it's definitely improving. And we're seeing a lot of really great things coming out. But then you look at things like dialogue systems, like Siris and Cortanas and Google Assistants and Alexas, and they're very, very basic in their interaction, right? I mean, like this expectation a couple of years ago where everything was going to be a conversational interface and bots were going to take over. And then you see how they don't work really, because we're still in a decision tree world, right? Where it's like,
so,
okay,
Vasco, you're going here anyway. Put on your futurist hat. When do we have C3PO walking around?
C3PO walking around. Well, C3PO didn't actually speak English, so maybe that's
C3PO spoke everything.
Oh, sorry, R2D2. Sorry, no, sorry.
Yeah, that's our R2D2. C3PO could actually translate from every English to every language.
Yes.
And again,
C3PO.
jargon buster here. This is a reference to a Star Wars film that was popular.
Yes, and there was a robot, and the robot was a translator. His job was translator, and he could translate everything to everything. Instantaneously.
He's also very smart, right? And I think I think we will have Babelfish before we'll have C3PO, because there's the intelligence part where Babelfish, you could you could potentially see, okay, things, if you evolve enough in speech recognition, that you can do speaker independent speech recognition with noise, with high accuracy, and with enough data, you could have, a speech-to-speech translation system that would be functioning, I would think, in the next 10 years in things that are day-to-day activities plus basic business interactions.
But like
so,
tourists, like for tourists and business people that want to do basic things.
Yeah. But even like not complicated business meetings, I would think in 10 years, yes. I think a C3PO, there's just fundamental things we don't know yet, right? I think it's hard to predict breakthroughs in science when they're required. And I think the main thing is intelligence, right? We don't know really what intelligence is yet. Like, we don't know how it works in us and how cognition happens, and it's tied to conscious. And like, for example, I have this theory where I think of language as a scaffolding of thought, right? So I think that our brains are this massive parallel machines, right? At every given moment, you're processing a bunch of stuff, right? There's visual input coming in, and there's sound, and there's taste, and your body's working, and your brain is processing that part, and there's feelings, and all this stuff is happening in parallel, and you don't even know it, right? You're not consciously controlling your heart or your lungs, and then at some point, this massive parallel thing gets serialized into a stream of consciousness that is the you that you perceive as you. Right? And I think that language is the scaffold that we use to express those thoughts, right? It's not necessarily the thing that controls them, but is the structure that enables you to express it. And which is why if you think in different languages, you have different abilities to express yourself, because it's different kind of structure. And if, but we don't know, right? Like, this is a theory, but we don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know when it comes to intelligence. And until we figure that out, like one example is the dialogue systems. And, until we figure out really how to reason, and I think that's going to be the next stage. So deep learning from a statistical perspective, huge improvement. Now there's a big debate in academia on, can we actually replicate logic just with advanced deep learning? Or do we need to now kind of have the pendulum swing and start researching symbolic AI again, and how to mesh symbolic AI with statistical AI, which is the case of deep learning, because you have a lot of amazing pattern recognition from deep learning, but it's still pattern recognition, right? It's not the application of reason. And humans, and reason has a lot of benefits, right, in terms of efficiency of how to achieve goals and shortcuts, and so until we figure out how we do that, you can't have a 3CPO, right? I actually think a very exciting path that I'm seeing is actually brain-to-computer interfaces. I'm a very big believer in that. I think that
like the Elon Musk superhighway connected. What's it called? I forgot what it's called.
The Neuralink.
Neuralink.
Yeah. So Facebook is working on neurophotonics, a different approach. There's a few people working on different sides of things. I think the latest demonstration of Neuralink was quite impressive. I believe that as humans, we are really geared to adopt any tool that gives us an advantage over our environment. And I think that before we'll get to a fully conscious AI, it's more likely that we'll have humans merging with AI, so that AI and hybrid model of AI and humans.
Yeah, superpowered humans. Yeah, because I remember Elon, he always says that the limitation is the bandwidth, right? Because we just have this, we have to type on this machine. And whereas if the
cell phone, right? It's like, right, and you can type very slowly, but you're thinking the equivalent of four 4K movies per second of bandwidth, right? And so if you have that, and if you think about it, that already happens inside our brain, right? You have the limbic system and the neocortex are essentially two separate systems that evolved in different times, but they're so well connected that you don't perceive them as different systems, right? So I think we're going to have a third part of our brain that is going to exist in the cloud outside of our brain. It's going to give us a real extension of our cognitive capabilities. And I think that is super exciting, because it's going to really change.
Fundamentally, and I know we're running out of time. Richard is ready to do the wrap up thing. But so how early will you be a first adopter of sticking something into your brain? Will you? What will be the litmus test for you?
So that's a good question, right? So I think removing a dime size of my skull to put something, I will need a few years to know that tumors don't come out of that before I put one. I'm more likely to, if there's like little filaments that are less invasive, if there's something on the outside, or initially Elon's vision was, can we do little nanobots that you inject into your brain, right, that attach to the neurons? Like, I think it needs to be less invasive, right? I think removing parts of your body to replace that is still
okay with
fairly
injecting nanobots that are going to be basically Bluetoothing to whatever device.
It depends. It depends. I mean, how many people nowadays, use what do you call
wireless headsets or wireless?
Well, definitely the wireless headsets. But I've been talking about the surgery that you do for hearing
LASIK.
No, for hearing impaired.
Hearing.
I
don't know about the hearing one.
It's it replaces your eardrum, and then you have the little device on the outside, and
right.
Your brain
hearing aids, just hearing aids.
Yes, but there's a specific
particular new technology, isn't there? That's replacing some bit of your body. So
yes,
it's basically an artificial ear, basically.
Yeah, and there's millions of people already using it, right? And and I think it's the question of when will you do it is a bit like the question of when will you use autonomous vehicle, right? And the answer is depends how drunk you are.
Yes. So be careful, podcast listeners, are going out for a drink with Vasco. You just might come back with a new implant. We often ask people about the role of luck and about leadership, and there's been such an interesting diversion. I don't want to I think that in terms of leadership, one of the characteristics of leadership is you have to have the faith and respect of your team. And I'm sure for people who work in Unbabel, hearing you talking so knowledgeably and expertly about the field you're in is part of the process. Are there any other aspects of being a leader that you found particularly challenging, or you feel you could, maybe atypical views of things that you feel are important that you don't hear being said by other people?
So one, it's not so much not being said by other people, it's just things that made a difference for me. I think being a student. So I feel that I'm very much learning. And so I think it's important to surround myself with people that can teach me. So people that are better than I am at what they do. And I think it was very important to get a coach post Series A once you are actually building an executive team and start that journey of founder to CEO. I think it is a journey. The learning to let go, like once you start managing people that are themselves very experienced managers, like it's different from understanding all the little nooks and crannies of the product and the tech and coding to then working on your business versus in your business, that kind of change in mentality. And how do you go from being micromanager to really managing high achievers that are really experts in their area? I think there's a lot to learn there of letting go, of trust, of how do you be comfortable being vulnerable with your own shortcomings? How do you recognize your limitations so that you're trying to complement this, yourself with other people that can help you? And doing this a continuous process, I think has helped me. But each person is a person. I'm still figuring out. Like I'm a very big believer in experimentation. And so there's a lot of things that Unbabel that are experiments, even on culture and does this work better and how do we iterate? And like, for example, now with COVID, like every company, we had to go remote. But then what happens afterwards, right? And we're now trying a hub mentality of it's a hybrid model, and we're gonna have we now have hubs in London and Lisbon and Berlin and New York, San Francisco and Pittsburgh, and we're trying to still gather around those rather than being fully remote. Like it's how do you experiment with that, right? And how do you experiment with a team that is the leadership team is divided into continents? I think there's a lot of things there that you need to kind of start by working on yourself, and not feel like you need to be right all the time. I think that's sometimes when you're starting out, you need to prove yourself and I need to be right all the time, but you don't. You need to have people that can help you with that.
Yeah, plenty of lessons, and we could have spent a whole podcast just talking about the issues you've raised. But for anyone interested in having their own organization, whether for business or for profit or non-profit, listen and pay attention to what Vasco just said. There's a lot of wisdom there. I think I'll flip this back to Kimon now for any closing questions and comments.
I mean, yeah, Vasco, I mean, your story is fascinating to me. And I mean, I know it a little bit probably from the inside because of we're in the same industry, in the translation industry. And I just think where you've come from and where you're potentially going is particularly exciting. You didn't say I have to give you a second to give yourself one more promo, a slice of promo here, because you didn't use the word translation layer. And I love that. That was one of the concepts I always loved in talking to you about, just like 2 sentences about why is Unbabel? What do you mean when you, because we've been talking about the process of translation, but in fact, a big piece of translation is how do companies interact and get the service, and how does it work? Do you want to just like 2 seconds on that?
Yeah. So the mission of Unbabel is really on building the world's translation layer, right? And what does that mean? Is we imagine a world where there is a layer that is connected to all the places where people communicate, create, and consume content, and that makes that communication possible in every language. And so the way that Unbabel works right now is we connect directly to, since we're started with customer service, we connect to the CRMs, to Zendesk and Salesforce and Dynamics and Oracle and all of those, so that the agents don't have to do anything different, right? They operate and work as they normally do. And we kind of work behind the scenes to make sure that that communication happens.
So you are in the client's environment. That's the point. You're in,
yes.
You're in the client's environment.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, let me, I have to move on to thank yous. First of all, thanks to everybody for taking the time to listen to this. You've gotten through, I'm not sure what we're at. We're probably about getting close to an hour and a half, but very interesting talk today. We have to thank Magda Fontakidis, my daughter, Vasco. If you ever need premium graphic design, video editing, or anything like that, shout out to my daughter.
Now we get to the real point of the interview.
This is the whole point. This is the only reason that I do this podcast, is to generate work for my daughter, Magda Fontakidis. There's a second Magda Buiskosh, that interns for us. She does all the PR and promotion. She's fantastic. She's a high school student, an up and coming person for sure as an entrepreneur, I suspect. Everybody at NBN who processes this and puts it up on the web for us. So if you want to subscribe, you can do that at NBN, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And obviously like and share and whatever. So Vasco, thank you so much for taking the time. You were a very interesting person to talk to. I know you personally, but this was really fun. I learned stuff about you here today. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure, and really happy to be here. This was a lot of fun. And thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed.